Imagine becoming the most admired woman in Europe before you were even old enough to understand the weight of a crown. Millions admired her beauty. Artists painted her portrait. Ordinary people dreamed of meeting her. She lived in magnificent palaces, wore dazzling gowns, and ruled beside one of the most powerful emperors in the world. But behind the glittering crown was a woman trapped by royal traditions, haunted by heartbreaking tragedies, and searching for freedom for the rest of her life. This is the remarkable true story of Empress Elisabeth of Austria, better known as Sisi, a woman whose life proves that wealth, beauty, and power cannot always bring happiness. Elisabeth Amalie Eugenie was born on December 24, 1837, in Munich, Bavaria, into the noble house of Wittelsbach. Although she was born into aristocracy, her childhood was surprisingly relaxed compared to most royal children. Instead of spending every day in grand palaces learning strict royal etiquette, young Elizabeth loved nature. She enjoyed horseback riding, hiking through forests, writing poetry, and spending time outdoors with her siblings. She disliked rules and preferred freedom over formal ceremonies. No one imagined this carefree girl would one day become one of the most famous women in Europe. When Elizabeth was only 15 years old, her mother took her and her older sister to meet the young Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria. The visit had one purpose. The emperor was expected to marry Elizabeth's older sister. Everything seemed carefully planned, but history had other ideas. The moment Franz Joseph met Elizabeth, he was captivated. Instead of proposing to the older sister as everyone expected, he chose Elizabeth. The decision shocked both families. Within months, the shy 16-year-old girl became engaged to one of Europe's most powerful rulers. In 1854, Elizabeth married Emperor Franz Joseph in a magnificent ceremony in Vienna. Crowds filled the streets to celebrate their beautiful young empress. Newspapers across Europe praised her elegance and grace. Many believed she was beginning a real-life fairy tale. But the fairy tale ended almost as soon as it began. The magnificent Hofburg Palace was nothing like the peaceful countryside where Elizabeth had grown up. Every hour of her day was controlled. She had to follow endless court rules: how to walk, how to sit, how to greet guests, even what to say during formal occasions. The young empress felt trapped inside a golden cage. The greatest source of her suffering was her powerful mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie. Sophie believed Elizabeth was too young, too inexperienced, and too independent to be empress. She constantly criticized her. She questioned her decisions. She expected perfection. For Elizabeth, palace life became emotionally exhausting. Then came an even greater heartbreak. After giving birth to her first daughter, Sophie insisted that the baby should be raised under her own supervision rather than by Elizabeth herself. Soon, Elizabeth realized she had very little control over her own children. Imagine becoming a mother yet being treated as if you were unfit to raise your own child. The emotional pain was overwhelming. Things became even worse during an official journey through Hungary. Both of Elizabeth's daughters became seriously ill. The younger daughter recovered, but the older daughter, little Sophie, died at just 2 years old. The tragedy shattered Elizabeth. She blamed herself for the loss and carried that guilt for the rest of her life. From that moment on, something inside her changed forever. The cheerful young girl who once laughed while riding through Bavarian forests slowly disappeared. In her place stood a woman struggling with grief, loneliness, and enormous pressure. As the years passed, Elizabeth searched for ways to escape palace life. She became obsessed with maintaining her extraordinary beauty. Her long chestnut hair reached almost to her ankles and required hours of care every day. She exercised relentlessly, practiced gymnastics, rode horses for hours, and followed extremely strict diets. Across Europe, people admired her as the most beautiful empress of her time. Yet few realized that beneath her famous beauty was a woman desperately trying to regain control over a life that increasingly felt beyond her control. While the world saw perfection, Elizabeth saw a prison, and the greatest tragedies of her life were still waiting just beyond the palace walls. The grief of losing her young daughter never truly left Elizabeth. Instead of finding comfort within the walls of the imperial palace, she spent more and more time traveling across Europe. The strict rules of the Austrian court felt suffocating, and every journey became an attempt to escape the life she never wanted. But while she felt like a stranger in Vienna, there was one place where she felt genuinely loved: Hungary. Unlike many members of the Austrian court, Elizabeth respected the Hungarian people, learned their language, and built close friendships with Hungarian nobles. They admired her kindness and sincerity, and she became deeply attached to their culture. Her influence on Emperor Franz Joseph proved to be more important than many people realized. Following Austria's defeat in the Austro-Prussian War in 1866, tensions within the empire were dangerously high. Elizabeth quietly encouraged her husband to seek reconciliation with Hungary rather than continue political conflict. In 1867, Austria and Hungary reached the famous Austro-Hungarian Compromise, creating the dual monarchy. Franz Joseph and Elizabeth were crowned King and Queen of Hungary in Budapest. For the first time in many years, Elizabeth smiled with genuine happiness. The Hungarian people adored her. To them, she was not just an empress. She was their beloved queen. Yet even this brighter chapter could not erase the sadness that followed her wherever she went. By now, Elizabeth had become legendary for her extraordinary beauty. Her waist measured only about 20 inches. Her magnificent hair stretched almost to the floor and required several hours to wash and style. She exercised daily, fenced, walked long distances, and spent countless hours horseback riding, earning a reputation as one of Europe's finest female riders. Painters struggled to capture her beauty. Poets praised her elegance. People across Europe copied her hairstyles and fashion. But beauty came with a price. As she grew older, Elizabeth became increasingly uncomfortable with public attention. She refused to sit for many portraits and often covered her face with fans, veils, or umbrellas whenever photographers appeared. She wanted privacy. The world wanted a legend. Behind closed doors, Elizabeth found comfort in reading philosophy and writing poetry. She admired independence and often reflected on loneliness, freedom, and the meaning of life. Her marriage to Franz Joseph also changed over time. Although historians generally agree that the emperor continued to love Elizabeth deeply, their lives moved in different directions. Franz Joseph remained devoted to his duties as ruler. Elizabeth spent much of her life traveling from country to country, rarely staying long in Vienna. Distance slowly replaced the romance that had once brought them together. Then, in 1889, tragedy struck again. Their only son and heir to the throne, Crown Prince Rudolf, was found dead at the Mayerling hunting lodge alongside Baroness Mary Wetzera. The shocking event, remembered as the Mayerling incident, stunned Europe. Historians generally conclude that Rudolf died in a murder-suicide, though aspects of the case have remained the subject of debate for generations. For Elizabeth, there was no mystery, only unbearable grief. She had already lost a daughter. Now she had lost her only son. Friends noticed that she was never the same again. She dressed almost entirely in black for the rest of her life, rarely smiled, and withdrew even further from public life. She wandered across Europe almost constantly, visiting England, Ireland, Greece, Switzerland, and the Mediterranean. Travel became her refuge. Yet no matter how far she sailed or rode, sorrow always seemed to travel beside her. People still admired the beautiful empress. But inside, Elizabeth carried wounds that no crown, palace, or fortune could ever heal. She once seemed destined to live the perfect fairy tale. Instead, she became one of history's most tragic royal figures. And fate had one final, heartbreaking chapter waiting for her. For years, Elizabeth wandered across Europe, searching for something she had lost long ago. Perhaps it was peace. Perhaps it was freedom. Or perhaps it was simply the happiness she had dreamed of as a carefree girl riding through the forests of Bavaria. Wherever she traveled, she tried to avoid the attention that had followed her since becoming empress. She often used false names while checking into hotels, dressed simply whenever possible, and refused the heavy royal ceremonies that once defined her life. But no matter how hard she tried, the world still recognized Sisi. By the late 1890s, Europe was changing. Political unrest was spreading. Radical groups believed kings, queens, and emperors represented an old world that needed to disappear. Several rulers had already survived assassination attempts, and traveling without heavy security had become increasingly dangerous. Yet Elizabeth disliked bodyguards. She believed they only attracted attention. That decision would prove fatal. On the morning of September 10, 1898, Elizabeth was visiting Geneva, Switzerland. She planned to board a steamship on Lake Geneva and continue her journey. As she walked toward the harbor with one of her ladies-in-waiting, an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini approached her. He had originally hoped to kill another royal visitor. When he learned that person had left the city, he chose Elizabeth simply because she was an empress. Without warning, Lucchini rushed forward and drove a sharpened metal file into her chest before fleeing into the crowd. At first, Elizabeth thought she had merely been punched. She stood up. She brushed the dust from her clothes. She insisted on continuing to the boat. Neither she nor those around her realized how serious the wound truly was. The thin weapon had pierced her heart. Shortly after boarding, Elizabeth collapsed. As attendants loosened her tightly fitted corset, they discovered blood spreading across her clothing. The ship immediately returned to shore, and she was rushed back to her hotel. Doctors did everything they could, but it was too late. At the age of 60, Empress Elisabeth of Austria was dead. News of her assassination spread across Europe within hours. People were stunned. Even those who had never met her mourned the woman whose beauty, kindness, and tragic life had captured the world's imagination. Her husband, Emperor Franz Joseph, was devastated. When informed of her death, he reportedly said, "You can never know how much I loved this woman." It was a heartbreaking reminder that despite years of distance between them, his love for Elizabeth had never faded. She was buried with full imperial honors in the imperial crypt in Vienna, alongside generations of the Habsburg dynasty. Yet her story did not end there. The world still remembers Sisi, not simply as an empress, but as a woman whose humanity was greater than her crown.